Hi everyone, I'm Frank from DroneZone UK. We are a new website and hopefully regular podcast for drone enthusiasts and professionals within the UK market. The reason we started this podcast, and you're obviously listening to the first episode, is over the years that we've been using drones in the UK, we've noticed that there is a real lack of concise and to the point information, certainly regarding the rules and regulations of drones within the UK, where you can use them, where you can't use them, and there's plenty of information globally, especially in the States. I've spent my drone journey listening to and watching the likes of Drone U in America, fantastic video podcast that they put out, and I know they've got Drone U where you can go and pay in and get even more information and more assistance from those guys. So by all means, go and check them out. They are Drone U. If you do a simple Google search, you will find them. They've got a multitude of information available for free. Like I said, some of it's paid, and I'm sure it's very worth it, especially if you're based in the States. But like I said, there's not a great deal of that kind of thing over here in the UK for the UK market. So I really wanted to start something. Hopefully, over the course of the next weeks and months, I'll be able to invite other drone enthusiasts and professionals to collaborate. Come on the podcast. And for all the listeners that tune into the podcast, I want you to send as many questions and points in as you can possibly think of. If you don't feel you're getting the information from somewhere, or if you think that it's a mixed bag of information and you don't know where to go and how to find it out, send it in to us, and I'll make sure that everybody's questions are answered. And if you've got a point to voice, then send that as well, and we'll make sure that we give it some airtime. So the email address to send your questions to is podcast, without an S, so singular, at DroneZone.UK. Like I said, I'll try and make sure we get to every question and give a shout out to anybody who does get in touch with us. So we're brand new. We don't have a great deal of digital footprint at the moment. We're gonna start with Instagram and Facebook and whatnot, but at the moment we've just finished building the website, so that's obviously going to be a work in progress over the next few months as well. But we really wanted to get the podcast kicked off so that you guys out there could have something to listen to and hopefully resolve some questions in the meantime. So like I said, we will get on social media and we'll be able to interact with everybody out there in that way as well. So just bear with us for a couple of weeks on that. So the first thing I wanted to speak about on the first podcast was the basics of droning in the UK. There are some news items that came out today that I also want to brush over, and I'll come to those shortly. But for drone pilots and if you're just getting into buying your first drone, or you're still what I would call a novice pilot in the UK, the best point of information I can give you at this moment in time is DroneSafe.uk. It's been put together by a couple of different organisations, but it basically gives you a snapshot of the core rules or regulations within UK airspace. So I'm aware that this podcast will be available to download in other regions and countries around the world, but I must stress that this does only relate to UK airspace. So, if you happen to be in Australia or somewhere else, you really do need to check the laws and regulations of the region that you're in, because these, whilst they will be useful, they may not all apply, or there may be a set of stricter rules that you have to follow. So bear that in mind. With that said, I'm going to crack straight on with the DroneSafe drone code. And in effect, by the way, there's a PDF download of this on the DroneSafe website. I'll leave a link in the description of the video podcast so that you can go and get your own. Now, it's important to point out that you can download the PDF, and I really would stress that you do so and print off a copy so that you can keep it in your drone flight case, or if you've got a rucksack for it or whatever. And I would say take it with you, because every time, I would say probably 8 out of 10 times that I go out with any drone, I'll get a member of the public coming over to me and asking questions, and it's really useful if you can just hand them that and say, yeah, here you go. If especially if you get someone who's a little bit how can I put it, overzealous with being a bit of a job's worth, if you like, and they want to know why you're there, and why your drone has a camera, and why you're filming, and can it see what they're doing, and so on and so forth. Obviously, you'll have to allay their fears with your own setup. If you are filming them, I suggest you don't. But if you're following the right rules, hand over the DroneCode and say, have a read. And if you still don't feel comfortable with me flying my drone in the vicinity that you're in, then we'll have to come to some sort of arrangement. But in the basic set of rules are really good. They're very concise, and providing you follow these, you really shouldn't get yourself into too many sticky situations. So the first thing I want to go over is they've laid it out on the PDF. It's kind of an acronym, drone. D being for don't fly near airports or airfields. R, remember to stay below 400 feet or 120 meters. O, observe your drone at all times. Stay 150 feet or 50 meters away from people and property. N, never fly near aircraft. And E, enjoy responsibly. So a couple of points in there that I really wanted to expand on. The airports and airfields one should be a no-brainer, but even last week, I think it was, I read a story on BBC News where a Boeing Dreamliner, one of the biggest aircraft in the world, was carrying nearly 300 people on board, and it was coming in on the approach to Heathrow, and a drone was up there at about 3,000 feet, which is way above how high you're supposed to go. At that kind of altitude, you really, I doubt you can even see the drone, and even if you can, you're clearly breaking the law. So the fact that we're still getting reports like that of people wandering into airspace that you're just not allowed to fly in, I find it ridiculous, but I think it's probably a problem that's only ever gonna certainly perpetuate and more than likely get worse, because drones are getting cheaper with the new models that are coming out. Obviously, we're up to, we fly DJI, so we're on Phantom 4 series at the moment, and obviously there's new Mavics that have just come out, and so that obviously bumps down the price of the older drones. So you can now pick up a Phantom 2, for example, for a couple of £100, and so it means that a lot more of the general public are going to have access to drones, decent drones that you can, fly up to 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers away. And so it's really important that this kind of thing is looked at, and I think it's something we're going to deal with in a future podcast, hopefully with a couple of call outs to the manufacturers. But like I said, we'll come to that in good time. The other thing is observing your drone at all times. You'll hear me talking on the podcast saying VLOS, or visual line of sight, and making sure that you keep your drone within your visual line of sight. For obvious reasons, you need to know not just what you're seeing on the screen, but you need to be able to see where your drone is at all times. Once again, I think that's a complete no-brainer. I don't know why you would want to fly it to an area you have no idea of where it is, and your situational senses, if you like, are completely out of the window. The only thing you have is the FPV view on your screen, And that's just not enough, because once you've lost your orientation of where the drone is, simply seeing what the drone sees isn't going to help you getting it back. So there's a lot of tools on your screen when flying a drone that show you the orientation of the drone itself, where it is in relation to you. You can also tell not just the altitude that it's at, but the distance from the controller. And so using the set of tools on your screen is really important to making sure you can get the drone home safely. That said, it's also equally important that you can see it in your visual line of sight, so that at all times you're in complete control. I think if everybody was in control of where their drone was and followed just those few rules, it would make droning a lot nicer and easier in the UK. I think the only other thing that really does make the general public wary is the privacy part of it. So, you know, most drones these days are equipped with a camera that shoots at least 1080p. Obviously the Phantom Range and I think the Mavics shoot in 4K, certainly the newest models do anyway. And so people are really dubious of what you're filming, especially when you're out in recreational areas such as, you know, open fields and parks. There's a few things I want to talk about on that note. Once again, that's going to have to come in the next podcast or future podcasts. But I think that is a real big one, and that's probably going to take an entire podcast itself. I would just say, obviously, following the drone code of staying 50 meters away from people and buildings, that doesn't just mean 50 meters above them. So don't fly it above their head at 50 meters. You need to be 50 meters in the distance from them as well. And so at 50 meters, any pilot that has a drone that shoots 1080p or even 4K with no optical zoom will tell you at 50 meters you can't really make out a person unless you know them, obviously. So you're not really going to worry anybody about their privacy. And so that can be easily explained away at the time as well. If you've got a member of the public that comes over to you and asks the question, you know, what are you filming? Why are you filming? Well, you can tell them, you know, don't worry, you're either not in the shot, and even if I've caught a glimpse of you in the shot, you cannot be made out. And if you're using DJI with the DJI Go 4 app, you can very quickly go into the album within the app and play back whatever you've just been recording, and very, very quickly show them exactly what you've recorded. If they have a problem with it at the time, I would suggest, if you don't need the footage, get rid of it in front of them, especially if it has them within the shot. Obviously, if it doesn't have them, then there's no need to get rid of it. But yeah, at this moment in time, I'm kind of calling on all drone pilots to be a bit more, what's the word for it, forthcoming when people are wary of what you're doing. It's our job as a community to try to not educate but inform the general public that are not used to the technology that we use so much. I think the reason people are wary of it is because they just don't understand it, and they don't know the capabilities of the kit that you're using. And so I think it's our job as a community to try and dispel fears and to try and give as much information to people that ask us as possible, because providing we do that and we do it in a friendly manner, more and more people are going to be accepting of drones. I've noticed over the years that it very much started off with elderly people not really liking drones. They didn't understand the technology, and so it made them quite scared of it, certainly with privacy. But over the years, I've been out on flights recently in and around southeast London and Kent, where I've had a number of people. So I was shooting some film out on the Kent coast at Herne Bay, and there was a couple, a mature couple, maybe in their 50s, they came over asking questions. They just genuinely had an interest in what we were doing, and drone technology more importantly. And I chatted with them for about 15 minutes, and they were lovely, really nice. And it just so happens a couple of weeks later I was shooting somewhere else, and they happened to be there. So that was down on Erith Pier, and they were just having a stroll down the pier, and bumped into them again, and we chatted again for about 15 minutes. They took more of a look at the screen and what I was shooting, and actually by the end of it, the guy that was there, he was saying, oh, you might want to get a shot of that over there or whatever. So if you spend the time speaking to the people that come over to you, if they've got a problem, try and dispel the fear and the lack of understanding that they have in the solutions we're using, because ultimately for the wider drone community it's only going to benefit us. I think it's the unknowing or the unknown that prevents people from accepting it and engaging with it. So I believe we can all do something to better that. So onwards and upwards to the next topic. I'm going to keep this the first podcast down to hopefully around 15-20 minutes. I don't want to get boring in the first episode, because I want you to come back and listen to the second, obviously. But I did want to touch on a few stories that I've seen recently, most of which have actually come out today in the UK. The first one being a criminal gang that some of them have been jailed in the UK for basically flying drones into prisons in order to drop packages. Said packages were allegedly drugs, and I think they've hauled in something like £500,000 worth of drugs that were being flown in. The criminal gang got caught, obviously. I think a number of them have been jailed. Around 7 of them have actually been given prison terms, and the remainder of the posse, as it were, have been given suspended sentences. The sentences vary, obviously, depending on their role. But ultimately, and I'm quoting here from the BBC News website, the gang was responsible for 55 drone deliveries into prisons around the country between April 2016 and June 2017. And the police have described the drone conspiracy as the biggest ever seen in the UK. The men were sentenced for between 3 and 10 years, and 5 other gang members were given suspended sentences at Birmingham Crown Court. Now, I don't know if you've ever flown near a prison, but whenever I've flown anywhere near a prison or an airfield, if you get too close, clearly your drone, if you fly DJI, it can't take off. It tells you it cannot take off. It's in a no-fly zone. And that's something I'll cover in a future podcast as well, with unlocking zones. But for all intents and purposes on this, I just want to keep it within the criminal element here, because clearly they know what they're doing. They're breaking the law. They're not bothered about that, because they wouldn't be doing it if they were. But they've obviously done something to the drones that allow them to fly where they shouldn't be going. And so that side of it, you can't really do much about. Again, that's something I think the manufacturers and possibly government need to work collectively on, to either minimize or completely stop from happening. And so, as with any criminal enterprise, if there's something that's made for the use of good, it's going to be used for the use of bad as well. I've heard of stories where certain drones have been reconfigured to drop munitions into war-torn zones in Syria. And so there's always going to be people that want to do bad with these things, as there are with anything else. People have now, unfortunately in the UK, started using vehicles to drive them into people. And so, with extremism and whatnot, I'm torn on whether or not it's going to become such a bad problem that it makes all of our lives much, much harder, or if the drone technology community and government come together in order to foresee and dispel these issues before they arise. So we'll see. And on this particular case, obviously these gangs have been flying drones, and I'm pretty sure they're the DJI Phantom range of drones from what I've seen in the press. They look like Phantom 2s, maybe 3s. They're a few £100. So when you're flying £500,000 worth of drugs into a prison, it's not a massive loss to a criminal enterprise like that. The good news is that they have been found and jailed, many of them. So I'm glad that that's happened, and I'm glad that the police have investigated it and dealt with it effectively here in the UK. And I hope that continues, because it's things like that that really give drones and drone pilots a bad kind of a stigma. That there is a stigma that goes with drones at the moment, and it's quite despicable, really. But I think there's going to be so many more laws that come out of all of this. It's going to be really difficult to fly anywhere if that doesn't stop, or if it doesn't at least decrease in the amount of activity that's going on with it. So that's enough about that. On to the next one. There's another news story. Again, it's abhorrent, actually, this one. So some drone pilot somewhere, obviously in South London, they've been flying their drone and it's gone into the flight path, or the approach descent path of a Boeing Dreamliner, one of the biggest airplanes in the world, carrying up to 300 passengers at the time. Obviously the pilots and the flight crew as well. And this drone has been flown way above the 400 feet altitude limit that is set in the UK. They've gone up to over 3,000 feet, which is absurd in itself. And they've flown right near the aircraft. So apparently they've come so close. It's been the closest near miss, the alleged closest near miss the UK has ever seen. So apparently this drone came within 10 feet, possibly meters. I'd have to check. But either one is close enough. It's too close, obviously, of the engine. And so obviously between a 2.5 to 5 kilo drone and a however many thousands of tons of airplane, the plane's going to win all day every day. But it's the total disregard for human safety and human life that really gets to me on this, because any number of things could happen. It could damage an engine, it could smash the windscreen, disrupting the pilot's view and whatnot, or causing a decompression of some sort. There's loads of things that can happen. Planes get downed by geese, bird strikes, and so it's the same thing with drones. And to be putting them so close to an airport, so close to a descent path, so close to the aircraft, I think is downright criminal in itself anyway. And so this is just another aspect of what is going to make it so difficult for decent drone pilots that are law abiding. It's going to make it so difficult for us to fly that it will take us back years rather than moving along with the times. And so once again, I'd like to put a call out to all pilots, no matter if you're a novice right up to prosumer, professional, whatever. Follow the rules. You're not supposed to be flying within 2 kilometers of an airfield or an airport. If you are close to an airport, call the tower. Let them know you're there. Let them know what your plans are. I've done this. I did it a few weeks ago at Biggin Hill Airport. I was on the phone to him for all of 5 minutes. told them where I was flying, the altitude, max altitude I'd be going to, how long I'd be flying for, and once I'd completed the project, I quickly called them back and said, project's done, we're not going to be in your airspace anymore. And they were fine about it. In fact, they were brilliant about it, as I'm sure every other control tower around the country is going to be. But it's all about that mutual respect, and not just for the people we deal with, but for the airspace. It's a very dangerous world up there, and we don't need to be making it any more dangerous. And God forbid it should ever happen. But if a drone manages to cause so much disruption and destruction to an aircraft that something terrible happens, that's not going to be good for any of us, no matter what you do with your drone. So they are, a couple of reasons that I wanted to start this podcast. And now that we're getting it off the ground, I will hopefully move it on to, sunnier topics. And so I do have one that I've got two actually that I pulled out of the news today. Again, these are from BBC News. So the first one is some micro drones that have been developed that pull heavy objects. Apparently they can pull up to 40 times their own weight. They're developed by Stanford University and École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in Switzerland. They look like cool little things. I'm going to run a video clip within the podcast so you can see what they're like. They're really cool looking little drones, and if they can seriously pull that amount of weight, that's going to make a big leap forward in drone delivery, which obviously is being talked about, and it has been talked about for a while. I remember a test being done in Amazon down in Australia, where they delivered a chocolate bar, I think, across however many kilometers. So it's something that is going to be a game changer certainly in the UK, in London. Only yesterday I was listening to LBC, and they were talking to courier drivers who find it so difficult with the dense traffic in the city. They can't do their job right, or properly rather, and they can't handle the capacity, the sheer volume of parcels that have got to be delivered on a daily basis. And so, drone delivery is just a no-brainer for that. So if the technology can be perfected and if it can be, made safe, I don't know how that's going to look, if we're going to have drone highways or something along those lines, but whatever it is, I think that's going to be really exciting for the future. And the last story I wanted to bring up was about search and rescue. So a drone team has now joined the Scottish Mountain Rescue unit. Search and Rescue Aerial Association Scotland supported a search for a missing person in East Lothian in September, so last month. Shortly after the incident, the association became a full member following a vote at SMR's annual general meeting. SMR's other members include Aberdeen, Arran, Braemar, Borders, Dundonell, Oban and Skye MRTs. An RAF team, 2 Search and Rescue Dog Association teams and 3 Police Scotland teams are also members. I've seen this recently as well with Kent Police, which is where we're based. I believe now Kent Police actually have a whole drone unit. So I think they use it for search, monitoring. So I think I've seen something on TV recently where when they do dawn raids, where they go and try and bust criminals, at 6 a.m. before anybody's, awake or whatever, they will put a drone up and have it close to wherever they're going to be going in to, issue warrants of arrest and whatnot, just to monitor the activity at the actual properties. And then they decide on whether or not they're going to complete that and go in and get them. So there's other things that it's been used for as well. I think it has been used for another kind of drug bust operation where they use heat-seeking sensors, thermal sensors, and fly it over buildings to locate the properties that they believe cannabis plants are being grown in, and also in search and rescue, so for picking up body heat. So it's really good to see that organizations like the police force and search and rescue are really not just informing themselves about drones, but adopting the technology, realizing the potential of the technology, and how for the future that looks. They're clearly trying to get on board. They're employing proper pilots. They're using DJI drones, as far as I can tell. I've seen Phantom 4s being used by Kent Police, and so that's really good to see in itself. So I'm glad to end with the news stories on that, because hopefully, especially in Scotland where you can be up a mountain and anything can happen, I do believe responses are going to be much quicker using drone technology, and therefore there's obviously going to be a higher chance of whoever is stranded coming back out alive, as opposed to years ago where if you went missing in the mountains, it was very unlikely that you would come back out. So that's really good. And that's pretty much it for the first podcast. The second podcast, we're going to focus on something a bit different. I'd really like some feedback from listeners out there that either like or dislike what the podcast looks like so far. I know it's a bit difficult to tell, but or if you've got some questions that you want to ask that you've not been able to find the answers to elsewhere, or if you've got some points that you want to raise, and if any of you want to actually have a discussion about anything drone tech wise in the UK, then give me a shout. You can contact me directly. I'm Francis at DroneZone UK, and I'll try and respond to as many as I can, if not all. And like I said, if you want to collaborate and come on the show and have your say on one of the podcasts, then give me a shout. I'd be happy to collaborate with any drone enthusiast around the UK. We can do it here, or we can do it from a distance. And like I said, the ethos that I really wanted to bring to this was to have a kind of central point in the UK where the drone community can all get together and discuss what's going on in the world with drones, what we expect from drones in the future, applications of drones right now, how people are doing business with their drones, those that don't do it for business and are doing it recreationally, what they do. Perhaps we could arrange meetups and stuff like that. The world is our oyster as far as that is concerned. So thanks for listening this time, and I hope you tune in to the next episode. That will be out on Sunday, so 2 days' time. I'm going to try and release a podcast every 2 to 3 days to begin with, to make sure we can get some volume out there that you can all get your teeth into, and that will give you a feel for what the podcast is going to look like in the months ahead. So once again, thanks for listening. I'm Francis from DroneZone UK.